Hello, we are Kritfayle and welcome everyone. We are joined again by the wonderful Drew Gaska, who is our favorite tabletop RPG writer and novelist and graphic novelist and all-round nerd encyclopedia.
That's a good descriptor. I like that. I always tell people that I realized I was successful when my all my useless knowledge became useful. So
Right.
Mm.
Right. So we are going to cover a game we had not heard of until Alien. And then after Alien and looking into stuff Drew had done, that's when we saw Carbon Grey. And it was a beautiful looking book, which was the first thing that I noticed was it stood out like just straight away. You get a lot of RPG books as standard hardcovers, and they're nice, but the Carbon Grey one, right from the word go, had a different look. Uh, like I initially, this is a graphic novel. I thought when I opened it, I got mine from Amazon, and I thought it was originally damaged because the corners were
yeah.
rounded. And just when I first pulled it out, and I thought, oh, they've chucked it into the truck and it's pushed the kill. And then I noticed, no, that's a design choice. And as soon as you could see how they folded the edges and that, it was really quite an interesting way of doing it. And the RPG has the same sort of like design feel to it. So I know the big question that the smallest member in our group asked, and he's played it, but he thought that this is an important question. What is Carbon Grey?
He played it already, and he asked this question
He
afterwards.
has. Well, he said his view was not everybody knows is going to know what it is, and it's got a lot of moving parts. Even after playing it, we ourselves had a couple of things that we sort of debated amongst ourselves over, which could have been deliberate. It could be part of the not everything's explained, and maybe it doesn't need to be, and maybe it shouldn't be. But yeah, it's quite an interesting setting, but it's sort of deep.
So it's a reality bending alternate version of World War One, where there's magic that's as dangerous as it is useful. I guess is the best way to describe it. There's the fabric of time is sort of tearing itself apart, and so there's continuity errors in reality. So basically, I'm making this off at the top of my head. You're in an airplane, it's going to crash, and this is a ridiculous example I've come up with. But your airplane is going to crash. You roll the dice, and if it roll wrong, your airplane turns into a bicycle, and you're going to die. I mean that's a totally pretty ridiculous example, but you get the point. Someone with a rifle, and suddenly it might become an assault rifle. Someone who's dead might walk out of this rift alive. There's all these things where time is sort of bending in on itself because people have been manipulating the continuity of reality, pretty much.
Well, yeah, the cover, she's holding an MP5,
Yeah.
which is about 70, 80 years too early for the First World War.
Yep. Yeah. So it's almost an anything goes type universe, I guess, because of that. You're limited by what you want to bring into it. And we have rules for that with the continuity. We call them continuity fluxes, and basically that's an area where people have done too much magic, and it's starting to cause a rift right there, and lots of chaos can come out of it. So things can happen that screw you over completely in the area. And if you're foolish enough to actually try to do something by bending the continuity when you're in there, when it's already in a bad place, you can be sure all shit's going to break loose. And I forget, can we curse here or not?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
oh yeah, yeah.
So on the table of how bad things get with the continuity thing, what do you call it? Since they're called continuity fluxes, the last one is called cluster flux, as it cluster.
I shall remember that for the next game.
We almost
So,
got there, didn't we?
Yes. Yeah, we sort of tied in, even though there wasn't any continuity issues in, I think it was Operation Nursemaid. I chose to have a child being from another timeline in that story to bring the group together. And it all sort of centers around this bee that is not supposed to belong in Middle Europa. And that bee's sort of the center of the story that carries on into Ashes to Ashes.
like Buzz Bee, like
like a buzz bee, like Apis mellifera, European honeybee.
Okay.
That's not meant to be in. It comes from Europe, but it's not meant to be in Middle Europa, right? So it's the disturbance that's not supposed to be there. Yeah, we actually had a lot of fun with that, especially with the kids rescuing the children. That was interesting.
I think we caused Emily a lot of stress.
Yes, we did.
Because she had to explain. Yeah, she was the
got out of control.
Yeah. Because that was her character. She played one of the Order, the children.
The Dharman Adepts.
The Dharman
Yes.
Adept. Yep. And so she was working with is it the dissenting apostate?
Yeah, okay.
Who was sort of going against her at a lot of things, but we sort of centered the story around rescuing the children, but one of the children happened to be, a child that doesn't belong there, came through with this bee, the sort of like the rift has opened up. So that stress in itself, the conflict that was being caused, was starting to tear things, and yeah. And Emily had already read up the rules on the continuity flux. So yeah, the continuity flux that was being caused by this child that wasn't supposed to. Well, the child and this bee being that weren't supposed to be in Middle Europa was going to cause its own potential tear due to the stress that it was causing the adept, because she was getting more stressed out by the situation and worse. And the apostate was running around not helping her very much. So
just not helping.
Yeah, well, confront children all covered in blood with a dagger to try and get them to move out of a room probably wasn't the best idea. Yeah. So, but I mean, it was a fun game. I thought it was something that we we weren't sure about how I guess things were going to run, Aaron. Hey, because it was a new game for us, and being Diesel Punk, and we'll get you to we might ask you what Diesel Punk actually is for the viewers. This amalgamation of futuristic technology, the rifts, the continuity issues, as well as World War One, the grit that was World War One, but you still had the pompous, all that going on in the background, the rich still, eating good, but you still had the troops in the streets that were, all, I guess downtrodden. There's no real end to this war in Middle Europa, right? So it's a very large universe that is very contradictory at every turn.
Is that what makes Carbon Grey a good story to be made into an RPG? that contradictory sort of nature.
I mean, there were so many things that were actually hooks here. It's like when Magnetic first asked me, "Do you want to take this graphic novel and turn it into an RPG?" My first thought was, okay, the art here is beautiful. So you know, that's it's very inspiring. Okay, so you get lots of ideas from it, you know, and I homing in on some of the little panels and blowing them up too big because the DPI was strong enough in the original files. It's like all this detail that they put into every little thing that gets lost when you shrink it down. We got some really great stuff in there. And the continuity thing, at first I was thinking, I don't know what to do with this. Because at first, it's like I'm flipping through the book and I'm like, wait a minute, that gun doesn't belong here. This doesn't belong here. Did they do their research? I don't know what's going on here. And then I stopped and I read, I was like, oh, okay. So then I started to realize you could have a situation where things can get unbalanced really fast. But a lot of GMs say things like that are always, oh no, it's going to ruin the game. But like whenever I've had players in the past with Dungeons and Dragons over the decades that I GM'd, somebody wanted to bring something in that was too powerful. I was like, all right, well, I'll make them regret it. You know, it's we'll find a way to balance that out in the story. You know, and we wound up getting the most interesting stories out of that, you know?
Yeah.
And I've had my players sitting at my table telling me they hate me, but they're back the next day because they actually love what the craziness that I put them through, you know? So I figured this is a good way to build a mechanic into the system where the GM has to think on their feet as well as the players. We had already, years ago, I became senior development editor at Lionforge Comics and Animation. Okay. And my first day in the office, my boss called me in and said, hey, we don't have anybody in charge of the gaming department anymore. And you know games, right? And they were remembering that I had worked at Rockstar Games on video games. I knew they meant tabletop games here. But I was like, yeah, I worked in games for a long time because I wanted to help run the tabletop department. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, so you can go run that. I was like, okay, that's great, thanks. Do we have a rule system we're using? And they're like, oh no, I just figured we'd come up with one. I was like, all right, well, I need a development budget and I need like 2.5 years for us to play test and everything. Like, no, we need to start putting stuff out right away, which didn't happen anyway. But I said, all right, well, I need to find a system we're going to use. And I was a huge fan of the West End game system from the Star Wars back in the 80s. So I went about finding out who had the rights to that, tracking it down, negotiating a deal so that we could use the logo and the rules and, in perpetuity by giving them a licensing fee, and did all this. And then they closed the gaming department. So nothing came out. And then Magnetic actually is a subsidiary of Lionforge. Like they're owned by them. So Mike at Magnetic called me one day and said, hey, did you know we got the West End game system over here? And I'm like, yeah, I'm the one who got it for you guys. And he's like, oh, want to do something with it? And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking about it, and it's like something like the Wild Die in the West End stuff added so much. You don't know what's going to happen with this, So I thought this is a perfect opportunity to use that with this continuity stuff. And it can get out of control where things can get really nuts really fast. And that's why we Eric Thomas and the game designer and we were like, all right, we got to give people a lot of hero points on this so they can use those to get themselves out of the shit we put them in. So that's, instead of starting off with 1, you start off with 6, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yes, you do. Yep, that's correct.
So I saw a lot of opportunities to even work in with the rule system that we had wanted to use for all our games. So it just like a good fit. And I love the grittiness of World War I. You know, I mean, it was awful. It's like before then, everybody was marching in lines at each other. Like this was a good idea, you know. And I think that was the first war when people were like, "Hey, that's not a good idea." You know, it was the first real dirty war where people realize we're all just going to get killed if we do warfare the way it's been done for centuries. And then the tank being introduced to the battlefield was brutal to people, you know. So it's really a defining change in warfare, and it just seemed like a really dark and depressing, interesting environment to role play.
Because that was sort of the problem. Was definitely the tactics had not changed, but the weapons had. And then we had 5 years of working out, oh, now that we have machine guns and no longer muzzle loading muskets, but bolt action and magazine fed stuff, and then aircraft and tanks and gas. And it was, oh, what are we going to do? It took them 5 years to work out how to deal with that. And it was I mean, the things that games don't sort of do when it comes to stuff like this is the First World War changed ecosystems with gas and mud and chemicals and the dead, and things that existed changed and were no longer there. And to this day, some of the areas are still scarred. Did any of that sort of go into the consideration for the game?
Absolutely. And that's the stuff that I brought in, because that stuff is not part of the plot in the graphic novel. So all the research I was doing on all the trenches and everything, and how much even just the trenches themselves messed up farmland, you know, and I was like, okay, there's an environmental angle here, which is great also for us to deal with. And that's where I came up with the Fenris wolves. Because I was like, there's all this wolf imagery throughout the thing, but the sentient wolves are actually not in the graphic novel at all. And so I proposed to the creator. I was like, listen, I have this idea, and we can deal with environmental issues, and these things have come out of the wilderness because their environments are being destroyed. And he's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's go for it. So it became the ability to play one of these wolves became an exciting, oh, I didn't think of that, to the setting in the first place. And in fact, we actually have several Carbon Gray things that are in development right now. I know a lot of people were like, oh, it's been over a year, they're not going to do anything. It's like, we had so much pandemic delays with everything, you know. We're lucky we got it out when we did, and now we're starting to do support materials for it. So we have campaign stuff that's coming out.
That's good.
So there's gonna be regular content being released for that. We also have a I guess a news from the front type newsletter thing that's going to be coming out that gives you new weapons and new scenarios, and gives you, you know, new political situations. That's going to be coming on a regular basis as well. So we're giving a lot of support material now, and assuming the support material goes the way we think it's going to sort of be the template for what we do with all the RPGs coming forward.
So we've done 2 adventures, and we've done it. We've tried to do it justice.
Operation Messmate and Ashes to Ashes. Done. Yeah.
And as Adam said, we were quite surprised because obviously with something like Alien, everybody had at least a base sort of knowledge. The same with Star Wars. Star Wars, I often said, was a good starting game for people, because what's a stormtrooper? Are they the guys in white? Yeah. Is the lightsaber? They're Jedi. Yeah. They sort of have that sort of base knowledge, but Carbon Gray's all new in a way. So we were surprised at how much fun we had and how good it was. And I would say to anyone who is looking for something different, check it out, because just because it might not be instantly familiar, it was a lot of fun and was very clever. But when we speak to someone about it, what do you think they should know about Carbon Grey? Like, what would be the most important thing if someone said, "Oh, what this Carbon Grey? What should we be telling them about it?" Do you think?
I mean, I usually lead with the fact that it's the alternate World War One timeline with the continuity stuff, because I think that that's the biggest draw right there. It's similar to like what people like about riffs. I don't know if you ever played.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
It's got a distinct setting, but it's got the ability to bring anything into it. And to me, I really love. I don't know. It depends on who I'm talking to, is what it comes down to. Because like
Right.
that's what I've told you already is just the basic stub of what I would tell people I don't know. But if I'm immediately getting flooded in my head about the things that I love about stuff like this. And one of the things is historical fiction. Okay, like there's all the countries that are in there are not our actual countries from Europe.
Right.
They're parallels to it. Okay, and there's ways. It's the same thing as when you have the Boys instead of Justice League. Okay,
Right.
you can tell stories with the Boys that you would never be able to tell with Justice League. Okay,
Yes.
because there's no way that the company would want to violate their characters like that. Okay, so you can tell stories about culture and history and bizarre political situations without stepping on toes in an alternate universe like this, you know. So it gives a lot of opportunities to explore things that could have been done or the reasons behind why certain things were done in history. And so I find that really attractive. It's like I've written a lot of alternate history, historical fiction stuff that has not come out yet, that I've always found it like, this is where I'm going to write my own stuff. This is where I default to. So,
Right.
you know, it was another interesting. Plus it's got mechs. I mean, with that Walker, what else do you want? No, it's a lot more than what it seems. And when you're looking at the art, it seems like a lot already. So there's definitely a lot there. If the creator's the guy who's the artist, okay,
Right.
so if the art wasn't as great as it was, I don't know if this would have been as attractive a project, you know, because it was one of these things where it's like, we have this budget, we want to do a game, we know the creator of this comic, we have access to all the art he did in the game, plus a bunch of art that didn't make he did in the graphic novel, plus a bunch of art that didn't make it into the graphic novel. So we can afford to do this with a low art budget, you know. So plus he's got followers already. It's like it's all these different things that are like, okay, this is a good way to experiment on what we can do with games in the future. And we don't. It was a risk without being a risk because of that, and it's helped us to open new doors on how to do these things. The West End, the D6MV West End Games license, the D6MV is our variant of it, where we're cleaning up some of the rules. And I think you may have noticed in the book, there's a couple places where it has a box text that says, if you were playing the original rules, this is what you would do instead. Because we wanted to give people what they were used to, plus there's some things where you're like, whoa, that's 8 steps because that was written in 1990, and nowadays we could do that rule in 1 step or 2 steps. So we clean things up like that. It's so useful for diverse things, and we're planning on using this system for all the games moving forward. So if we had something, let's say we adapted something, an anime with mecha, okay, then now you can have mecha like that on, facing troops in the mud on World War One battlefield, or you can bring superheroes into this or whatever. It's all going to have the same rule system and work together. So Carbon Gray was kind of like the foundation for this, for us to see, because the fact that it had the continuity changes and could bring in modern stuff like that, it gave us a chance to see, okay, what happens if we take a musket against, an assault rifle or things like that, if that makes any sense. Conceptually and rule wise, it just wind up giving us a lot of opportunities to figure out what we can do with this. So it's my mind. When you say what would I tell people? I mean, I don't know how to separate from my mind what I would tell them, because I could be telling you about the historical fiction stuff and you could be falling asleep over there. So it's different things that appeal to different people is the best way to say it, I guess.
I think it was lucky in a way, or maybe not lucky, but it's like Adam and myself are history nuts. So
okay,
we're flicking through the book, and it's got like a Halberstadt and Albatross Scout up in the back and under the aircraft stuff, and I'm like, oh, because I build model kits, so I'm all into planes. So I was like, oh, that's cool. I know, and they call it something different because it's not Germany, but I'm like, oh, that's really close to being a Halberstadt. But Emily's, we were talking about it. Oh, look at this, the MP5 and all this and Emily's like, oh god, the boys are talking guns and gear again. But the continuity stuff and magic and supernatural, and she likes all the quirky stuff. So for her, Carbon Grey was still attractive because while we were looking at the mud and the trenches and thinking this would be a great place to play in a game, not in reality, but that's cool. But she's looking at she was looking at all the other side of it, going, oh, I can play a weird, strange kid who can bend reality, but I'm not really a kid, but I'm a kid, and we play with that a lot. We did take we had to do the gag. We couldn't not do the gag where I offer a gumdrop and she tells me off for being limiting, and she's not a kid and I'm stupid for doing that. And then 10 minutes later, she asks what flavor they are.
Relating back to Marshall in the in the book.
Yeah. So I do think that was, I think, a good thing about it. I think because like if we just said, oh, Emily, we've got a war game, she might be like, okay, I'll play anything we do because we all love being together. But she'd be like, not my first choice. But it's not only a war game, and it's the same, I think, on that other side. If someone's not fully into sort of mysticism or the supernatural or anything like that, but they really like that historical stuff, you can sort of say, well, yeah, that is part of it, but you can also, there's also the mud and the trenches and cavalry scouts, which is...
Well, there's 24 character archetypes that you can choose from, right? So there's a diverse choice, and I'm interested to see how that plays with the new content, Drew, with the campaign coming up. Because you can choose anything from like a free lady lord to a scholar to a master spy to a sharpshooter to a pilot, or a cavalry scout, to name a few. So it's definitely a really interesting setting.
Yeah, one of the things I really like, and it's something I do with the alien stuff as well, is that I want to make sure that you have a billion opportunities here. Nothing you do should feel railroaded. Okay. So in Carbon Grey, let's give everybody this wide array of different character types that all fit this era. There's nothing here that doesn't fit. I mean, the wolf is made up, obviously they didn't exist in the real world, but they ties into the ecological disasters that are being caused by this. So so you can play a wolf or play a free lady, and the whole nature of the game can change because of that. With Alien, I try to approach it so that, and I've said this before, I think I've said it on your guys' show, that every time you want to go west, there's some asshole who's going to go east instead.
Yep.
Well, so I figure, okay, if that asshole does that, here's what the GM has to work with. So I want to make sure no one feels like you got to do this thing you don't want to do. If that happens, it's because of your own choices, which is how life really is, You're stuck in a dead end job. Yeah, you need to pay the bills, but you chose not to take the risk to try and find something else. I personally was in that situation where I was in a good paying job forever that I hated, and it got to be too much. And then finally I decided to walk away and went full blown into my writing career. So it's for 10 years, I was afraid to move from that. So really, at the end of the day, it was my decision not to take that risk. So whenever it comes out of your choices in a game, especially a role-playing game, that's what it should always be. Your choices led to this situation. Okay. Yeah, I think that's my biggest advice I can give to GMs. Just make sure your players never feel like they're railroaded, even if you somehow have manipulated the situation so they've done exactly what you wanted them to do. They got to feel like they did that, not you.
So yeah, the question, we had a question, which was partly Adam and I think also Emily, was how are the character archetypes determined? How do they fit together? And do you have a favorite of the archetypes?
In regards to how are they chosen, the first thing was going through the story and seeing, okay, there's a spy here, there's this here, there's that there, out of the main characters that were in the story. And then after that, it became, well, if there's the Dharma Adepts, then there's got to be what happens when they get too old. Okay. When they get too old, then they're kind of, maybe they're discarded. And then if that's the case, then there's going to be this guy who's jaded. And so that's the dissenting apostate, so it's like, it's suggested by the rest of what's going on in there. Just like the wolves were suggested by the environment. How they all work together, every single one of them has abilities that the other one doesn't. So everybody brings something to the table. If you have a team of 6 Marines, it's going to get boring. But if you've got the Marine and the trench fighter and this and that, then every one of those people is part of a military unit still, but they bring something else to the table by their special abilities. In regards to favorite, that's a tough one. It's what makes it tough is I have always gravitated towards rogues. So that's the type of character I want to play. But I also really love oh my gosh, I can't remember what it's called. The mentor character. Was it called a mentor? Did we call it a mentor in the final archetypes? I was like, did we call him a mentor? Yeah, we did. Okay. I just love the part machine, part man thing, and the whole concept of behind why he's loyal to this family. I just thought it was a really interesting thing. But at the end of the day, I'm probably going to have to say, because I'm the one who brought it in, is it's that damn wolf. I think that it changes the playing field. It no matter what, when you have a bunch of guys and a wolf as part of the team, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's going to change the dynamic of every adventure you have. Whether someone just thinks it's a regular dumb dog, or it calls another pack of wolves to come help in the fight, or whatever. I don't know if you guys have played or seen the solo adventure we wrote for it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. It's in the book. Yeah,
the wolf has a big role in that. So it definitely, the wolf is my favorite. The thing is that it has to, all the archetypes were period specific, and if they're not period specific, they are based on what's going on in the graphic novel. And that's the same way that the approach was with the Star Wars role-playing game. Obviously you had the smuggler, you had the Wookiee first mate, you had all those that were clearly from, but then they had some weird ones that clearly were filling in the blanks that fit perfectly in the universe. The scout character was one of them.
Yep. I think Kid was the most useless one. No one wanted to be a kid.
But we have a kid. We have a kid in Carbon Gray, also the Grease Monkey.
Yeah.
Because well, I couldn't believe it. I was doing this research and how they used to have these kids in these overalls climb into the machinery and everything to fix things and everything, and they were losing arms and stuff because they're getting stuck in the machine.
Really?
I'm just
Wow.
like, this is awful. This is awful.
Yep.
This is a really interesting character thing, but man, in reality, this was awful that this was okay back then.
Yep.
Yeah.
I knew they had chimney sweeps.
Yeah.
But
It's along the same line as that, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's like they have a giant factory machine and it would get stuck and they'd send the kid into the gears to go fix it. It's just like, all right, this is definitely a template that's worth having, you know. But yeah, just the kid in Star Wars, yeah, that was kind of boring. But it was like it depends on what you do with it. Again, it's like one of the things we're doing moving forward with one of the future games is kid is not a template, but kid is something that you could be for any of the templates. It just, there's an adjustment to certain scores. If you take a kid, you're going to get a bonus to this, but a minus to that. You know, that type. Because why am I just a kid and not a kid who wants to be a pilot? You know, it's things like that. So yeah, one of the things we're doing with the rule system is trying to expand. While we're simplifying a bunch of stuff, we're also expanding other stuff, and the stuff that we're expanding is all role-playing related,
Right.
instead of number crunching related.
Right.
But in order to make it attractive, why would I take that kid? Well, the kid has these pluses, that's why. So now I've appealed to the guy who wants the number crunching instead of just a role-playing aspect, but really we're basing these on what can you do to make the table interaction more interesting.
Well, I think for Adam and myself, we were the only ones in the group that experienced D6, and we had through the original West End games, Star Wars and Indiana Jones. But I think the Star Wars RPG for us was the first game where we went from AD&D, which we loved, but we probably just played it shenanigans. Kick indoors, kill monsters, steal loot, get a magic item, yay. The Star Wars game was the first one where we went from that to actually role-playing. And part of it was because it was Star Wars, and we wanted to be in Star Wars, which meant, yeah, if you could take a X-Wing pilot, there was already that, I've got an X-Wing pilot. But those D6 rules were the first ones that moved us more from that just rule-based shenanigans to actually trying to tell stories. And I mean, back then we were in high school; they would have been terrible stories. We would have loved them, but they would be terrible. If we look back now, we'd be like, "Oh God, why'd you do that?" But I was impressed with the new rules for Star Wars because they have, for us, it became our go-to rules because the Genesis system allows you to succeed and have disadvantages, or fail and have advantages, or succeed with an advantage and fail with a disadvantage. It depends. And we could see that in the movies when Leia says, you know, you got to lock the door. There's no lock, and he shoots the controls, and then she says, "Hey, we need the controls for the bridge," and he's like, "Oh, I just blasted him. Success, he locked the door. Disadvantage, also the controls for the bridge." And we saw Han with a failure with a disadvantage when he was like trying to hack the doors into the bunker in Return of the Jedi, and he's like, "I got it," and he closed the extra blast doors. And we found that those, as a rule, really facilitated player interaction, because normally it's like, "Can I open the door? Give me a roll." No, you failed. But now it's like, you failed, but something went right. So you couldn't lock the door, but something else happened that was good. And instead of it just being that instant yay or nay, now they're like, "Oh, okay, so I couldn't lock the door, but something's gone right. So I can't stop the door being them coming through, but there's got to be something that I can make that's a benefit." And I noticed, I think, like you said, the wild die, it sort of plays like that. The 1 or the 6 is sort of doing that same sort of, it's sort of a faster, a little bit more streamlined in a way, because obviously the other one is a bunch of dice you're rolling to get all these advantages, but it sort of does the same sort of thing. It's like, it's not just success. It's like, oh, you said, yeah, you succeeded, but something really good happened. It's not exactly a critical success either, like as in the old roll a 20 or a 1. It's more sort of theme based in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was obviously designed that way, but what sort of led you to sort of adding something like that into the old D6 system and to modernizing it? Why did you think that was important?
Honestly, I would say the whole inclusion of the wild die, and okay, so we started off, and I said to Eric, I don't want to complicate it. I want to do first edition West End games. Okay, I don't want to do second edition. I don't want to use stuff from the rules compendium. I just want to do first edition, hardcore, old school. Okay, and then we were looking at it, and we're like, the continuity stuff, the wild die would really fit with this. The wild die came in, and that level of success and disadvantage and of failure, it's like, you failed, but it wasn't that bad. Oh my God, you really failed. I thought that added a lot to it as well. So we're, that originally we were thinking the wild die was going to be specific to the carbon gray system, but yeah, with everything that we developed around it, we think it's going to continue as part of it. We were looking at this also before, like each one of these systems that we do for these games, because we have at least 2 game releases coming out every year, major releases for the foreseeable future. Okay. And it was going to be like, the wild die is only for carbon gray, and then this thing is only for that. And then we realized, if we work it so that you can have all these things together and just eventually have like the ultimate D6MV system that has all these things that can, if someone's like, I want to play new game here, but I want to take the obligation system from Carbon Gray and move it into there, because I think we do something. Well, we need to make sure it's completely compatible and it'll be fine together. So in the end, you're going to have all these options that come from all these different iterations of the game, and they should all blend together just right. And hopefully at that point it won't become a number crunching nightmare. But I think if we plan it right, it's all going to be. It's never. None of these things are crunching the numbers at the table. Right. It's like, we're going to take the obligation system, which gives you. If someone comes out of your past, you got to do what they tell you, because but you get this benefit from being able to tie into the having the family network to deal with, or something like that. You can get you can get favors from the family or whatever. That stuff gets determined before you get to the table. So it's like, it's not, you're sitting there and it's like, okay, now it's not like that bullet thing we were talking about before. I don't know if that was us talking privately or if that was in this episode. The bullet with the sniper rifle, was that beforehand or was
that was it? Yeah, we'll talk about the drop and
bullet drop and wind and
bullet drop and wind and yeah.
So all this stuff that adds modifiers and whatnot to it should be figured out before you get to the table.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I have this benefit and I have this gun, so I'll just add those two together and boom. It's not going to be, oh, but you have this negative here, and we have to do all this math at the table. But you have all this stuff that's available to you in whatever situations, because you took the minuses or the pluses or whatever while you created your character, or when you upgraded your character because of experience. So there's number crunching in that way, but it's not number crunching where you're going to go insane at the table. And one little combat thing like that Phoenix Command game that was in the 90s. Did you guys ever play that?
No.
So the aliens from Leading Edge games, the aliens game from that and the Terminator game from that were made by the same people who did this game called Phoenix Command. And the combat system was a light version of Phoenix Command. Now, you could have one exchange of, you have one round of combat that would take over an hour in that system. And for for war gamers who are just interested in, I want this to be as realistic as possible, that works. But I don't think that ever works for role playing, because the whole point is that you're playing this role. You're not sitting there and doing all this math. Right. And that's the thing too. It's like none of these rules, except for like the basic core of it, are necessary. You could be like, I don't like obligations, so we'll remove it. It's not gonna put a hole in your thing. The only thing you've got to be careful with is something like the hero points, because everything's so deadly, the hero points were put in there as a balance. You need to be able to, I mean, in the comics, the main character she jumps out of a blimp and she's jumping from airplane to airplane to get to the surface, and it's totally crazy, but it works in the story itself. So if she didn't have those hero points, I think she would have splattered on a windshield, and that would have been the end of it. So if you're going to make something crazy and deadly, you've got to have something that's going to allow the players to get out of it. In Alien, I just tell people you need to run.
And it just for the record, as GMing Alien, it doesn't help. It will still catch you
if it wants to.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, if I was GMing and everybody and the alien shows up and everybody just books and run, I think I'd let them live, because I'd be like, hey, they use their heads,
Well, I do think that was one of the most impactful entrances of an alien was in Isolation, when it's in the vent and the vent drops down and she hides underneath the desk, and it lands on the desk and the tail comes off like a chain and thumps onto the ground, and it's over her and she's shaking and quivering, and it's sort of doing its sense thing, looking around, for want of a better word. We're not sure if it has eyes exactly, but it's looking around, and then it drops down and slides out of the room, and it was like terrifying, but she escaped that one. And I thought it was such a stress-filled but brilliant entrance of the alien without anyone dying.
Yeah, that game, I played it so many times I was never able to finish it, because I spent most of my time hiding in corners. The West End system just allows you to have a lot of opportunities to run things, and in some ways, it's like, even the free league's alien system for Alien, it's like it's not complicated,
Right.
It's you have piloting skill, okay. If you're driving a car, you're using the same thing, okay. Now, in my mind, when I first got the Star Wars system, because it was the same way, I was like, well, a car is not the same as a spaceship, so it doesn't matter, because it just moves the game along, and that's what you need to make sure.
Right.
So when we add new stuff, if it doesn't enhance your specific campaign, then just don't use it. But there are benefits that will make the players want to take this disadvantage, which offers you role-playing opportunity that you wouldn't have had otherwise.
So with the, like you said, when it's Mathilde, was it Mathilde? Jumping from plane to plane, causing utter chaos and havoc.
Oh, it was Giselle. Was that Giselle or Mathilde? I know Giselle caught the bomb down on the
yeah, it was Giselle. It was Giselle.
Yeah.
Made me so how does the RPG then differ to the comic? Because I mean, she's almost superhuman. I mean, she's one of the Greys, and that's all tied around them specifically. But how do you think the RPG differs to the comic?
I don't know. Well, I mean, differs how? Because I approached it again the way I approach. Well, okay, so I approached it the way I approached GMing for Star Wars back when I was, in high school. We were talking about being in high school.
Yeah,
it was. I always told my players, "You're not Luke Skywalker. You're not Han Solo.
Right.
Okay, we're not going to contradict the movies. Okay, so I said, I don't want any Wookiee first mates. You want to be a Wookiee captain and have a human first mate? Let's do it. We're not copying what we saw in Star Wars. Okay, we are adding to this universe. And what I realize now, looking at it, is the Mandalorian is like the perfect Star Wars role playing campaign. Okay, because here's these characters that are new, that are tied into Star Wars mythos, but then we got Luke coming in as a guest star. It's like, and that's what I used to do when I gamed it. It's like you may cross paths with Luke and work with Luke towards something, and then Luke is going to go away again, and you're going to have to do your stuff. So that was almost a tangent, but it actually ties in. The comic book gave us of Carbon Gray gave us a specific story with these main characters. Okay, so you in one iteration of this, you can't be the main heroes of this universe. You're playing in the aftermath of everything that happens with them. But something we introduced into the campaign book was because, I mean, do we give spoilers here for the comic or what? What should we do? There's a situation.
Spoiler alert.
Skip the time index a few minutes from now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, it's definitely a recommended read if you haven't read the comic. I think we've all read the comic, and it is actually a really interesting read. And it gives a great insight into the universe too.
There's repercussions from the continuity errors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So because of that, almost everything gets set back to zero. So the comic could play out the way it does, and because of what happens at the end of it, the next time around that this happens, your heroes could be the Luke Skywalker in that case. Okay, maybe your characters are what changes the destiny of Middle Europa on that time around. So it's an idea we introduced in the campaign book, where because the only people who remember what happens when these changes happen are like Marshall, characters like him who have a sense of things beyond our reality. So because of the continuity errors, there is the ability for you to actually become the main characters of this universe the next time around if you want. And I don't mean you become Giselle. I mean, whatever character you've created changes everything the way Giselle did, if that makes sense. So that's how it differs. How it differs in the from the graphic novel is, if I was to play a campaign with this, with players, what I would do is I would have them exist within the universe and the events that are happening in the graphic novel. Okay, and then the events of the graphic novel will play out, and time sort of changes, and then this time I let the players loose to do whatever they want, where they're not constricted by you can't do this because Luke is going to do this. You can't kill Darth Vader because we know what's going to happen with Darth Vader. Well, next time around, maybe you can kill Darth Vader.
Right.
So yeah, I want to build these things, and I try to do this with Alien also. It's like one of the things we did with Alien, and I was talking about this last time, and you mentioned Emily, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I spoke to her. It's I'm trying to connect media with stuff. I want the video games to tie into the role playing game, to tie into the novels, to tie into everything. So outside of the movies themselves, you have a living, breathing, expanded universe. And one of the things that we did with Alien was, for 3 novels, I wrote one-act adventures that go in the back of each of those novels that tie into the events of the novels, and the novels themselves were written to tie into the events of the game. So, meaning the game in general, what we have happen universe at that moment. And the second book, Inferno's Fall, is about something terrible happening on a colony world that has 5 different colonies on it. Okay. And a Marine ship is sent in and they launch a team to go to deal with whatever the novel's events are. But one of the scenes in the novel, after the ship launches, they start getting distress calls from elsewhere on the planet. And the commander on the flagship says, we need to send teams to each of those locations. And then the rest of the novel takes place with the team that we saw launch. But the adventure in the back, you're playing one of those teams that was sent to one of the other locations on the planet. So now, if you were to play that and then read, we need to send a team, you read the novel afterwards, you're like, hey, they're talking about us. That's where we were sent. You're part of the universe now. Okay. So making you feel like you are part of what matters in this universe as a player is something that's important with all this stuff to me. And that's how we introduced that thing in the campaign book, where you basically can change the next time around. What happens? Is it you who changes destiny? Well, without violating anything that's going on. So I would never write an adventure in Alien where you're going to play that team of Marines that went to that particular thing we saw happen in the novel, because either you're going to feel like I have to do exactly the same thing that happened in the novel, or you're going to make it completely different, and then you've invalidated the novel or invalidated your own gameplay. Either way. But by having that other colony on the planet that's having the same problem at the same time, now both things can happen and both tie into what happened in the novel. So I always feel like I'm rambling when I go on these things, because I go
never.
And stuff. Let me know if I don't make sense, please.
Yeah.
We try and bring that to our games as well, right? Those little things, like we've had Darth Vader make a guest appearance in one Star Wars. What did you do in the bar? You did something in one of the other Star Wars games, Aaron.
I've done so much. We've had players part of the Battle of Hoth, but when I did it, I've tried to make sure that they're in their own section of it. So, like you said, they could witness certain events, they could see Wedge bring down the AT-AT, but they're not doing anything that was contradicting what you see when you watch Empire Strikes Back. And I think that's it. It's little things, but it's sort of like a small ripple that becomes big, because then the players can feel a lot more connected to everything that goes on. And like you said, I think it's important that they don't trap themselves mentally in going, oh, we're doing that book, so but they went through that door and something, because they can go both ways. They either feel they've got to go exactly the way it did, or they get afraid to do anything. They go, but in the book, going through that door led to him dying, so we don't want to go through that door. And then they start second guessing what they should do. So I think that's really So I think that's a good thing. And I've got the first novel with it, and I really liked that adventure in the back, which I think is the one written by you. I don't know. Did you write all the adventures for the 3?
I wrote all the adventures,
Cool. Because the first one, we haven't done it yet, and he doesn't know. He knows his agenda is already terrible, because I sent everyone the agendas they chose, and he already looked at it and went, fuck me, how am I going to... This is bad. And I'm like, if you think it's bad now, 10 minutes into the game, you're going to see really how bad it is, because he doesn't know yet how bad that's going to be.
I know which character he is now. I know which character he is.
And that's
There's always one character who I pretty much, and when I'm writing these things, all right, this is the fuck you character.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, honestly, most people have the most fun playing the fuck you character.
Yeah. I think I'm going to,
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of moral choices he's got to make once he realizes his plan has gone horribly wrong right at the start.